Hello all you Reaper indoctrinated cosmonauts. As always, I am Cosmic, and today we're going to be previewing Mass Effect Andromeda. The game is coming out, obviously, in a couple of days' time from this video, and I wanted to share with you my first impressions of the game after playing the Origin Early Access trial, which gave you about 10 hours worth of gameplay. It wasn't quite 10 hours, I have to say, I completed it way before then. But I wanted to get down my impressions so that you had something coming into the launch, because my review is going to take some time and it's not going to be up on day one. So, Mass Effect Andromeda, it is a big one, and it's not a big one because it's EA, it's not a big one because it's AAA, it's not a big one because it's BioWare, it is a big one because it is the game that will, in my opinion, save or destroy the rest of Mass Effect as an IP, as a franchise. I've said this before and I'll say it again. After the travesty that was the ending to the third game, after all the crap that happened surrounding that, I legitimately believed, and still do to some degree, that the Mass Effect franchise and the IP has been severely damaged. Its reputation has been damaged, the way consumers perceive the IP is damaged, and I don't think that can ever fully be repaired. However, I do feel that Mass Effect Andromeda could have potentially given life, and still could potentially give life into a series that just ended on such a sour note. So it is a big game because I feel that ultimately the fate of the entire IP rests solely in its hands. So the first thing I want you to talk about is, of course, the gameplay. Now, those of you who've watched my previous Mass Effect Andromeda videos know that I came into this game with a great degree of skepticism, and I had issues with some of the preview of the trailers and some of the facial animations, and I'll get into all that in a moment. But let's start with the core gameplay itself. For me, Andromeda is essentially what I thought it would be. It is a blend of Mass Effect and Dragon Age Inquisition. You have big elements of Dragon Age Inquisition in there in terms of its core gameplay, and then you have the Mass Effect style gameplay as well. And it is a blend of the two. So what you end up having is a combat system that is very much Mass Effect, and for the most part works very well. Still can be a little bit clunky at times, and the cover system can be a little bit clunky because you can't just press a button to go into cover. You actually have to just stand by a box or a wall to actually automatically go into cover, which can be a little problem when the game decides it's not going to register that you're standing by cover, so it just leaves you out in the open. That can be a little bit frustrating. The movement system can be a little bit clunky, jumping around from place to place, but I have to say as an overall experience that the combat is actually damn solid, and it is a lot of fun. There's multiple things you can do, there's much more variety, it's much faster paced, there's a lot of movement in there, and I think what they've done is taken the combat from Mass Effect 3 and improved it and put it into a more open world. I always felt like a lot of Mass Effect 3 was very much like a corridor shooter because you were going down various corridors or small, very significant rooms, whereas in Andromeda you are in these wide open spaces a lot of the time. So that needed to be adapted, and I think that the overall execution from what I've seen so far certainly works in its benefit, and I feel that it provides a really solid third-person combat experience. I enjoyed the character progression as well. I have to say that once I created my character and chose basically which way I wanted to go, it's been very much streamlined. It's more RPG focused than, say, Mass Effect 3 was or Mass Effect 2 was. I also like the inclusion of item progression, so you can, research and develop your own items and armor. You can switch out armors, you can switch out weapons, you can mod those armors and weapons, and the entire game feels much more like what I wanted from Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 than I actually got, because I often felt that Mass Effect as a series started off at the very first game as basically sci-fi Knights of the Old Republic, right? They took it and then brought it forward, and so it was very much RPG based. And as you progressed through the Mass Effect trilogy, you found that it went more third-person shooter and less RPG-like. And I feel that they've incorporated more RPG elements into Andromeda. Not too much to become overbearing, but I think it is a nice between the line, right in the middle, between the original Mass Effect and Mass Effect 3, meaning that players of both will get a kick out of the character progression and the item progression, because it's not overbearing, it's not overwhelming, but at the same time it's fun and it's in-depth enough that I could get my teeth into it. In terms of the exploration, I have to say, from what little was there, what we actually got to see, because we only got to see really a priority mission in the early access game, which was obviously set-pieced. I don't know how open world other planets that are only just basically exploration planets are going to be, but I have to say that I enjoyed the open worldness, with a little quotation marks, because it's not quite open world. They're large levels, very much like Dragon Age Inquisition. It's not really an open world game, you just have large levels on individual planets. Now, I certainly felt that it was a very enjoyable experience. There was multiple things to do within the level that you were given. There was all kinds of side quests, there was all kinds of little things that you could find during the exploration. However, will that translate to all of the worlds that they say you can go on in the full game? I'm not sure. I hope that that is the case. If all the other worlds are basically packed full of content like this one, then that's not a problem at all. I actually like the fact that they included a lot of audio logs, a lot of written logs, very much like The Witcher 3, in terms of providing a backstory to each individual planet, finding out who lived there, what events took place there, and it was a nice little lore moments here and there that really pulled the experience together in terms of the exploration. There are a couple of things, however, that I absolutely hated about exploration. One was the rover. The rover's really annoying. You have to switch it to go up steep hills, and you have to switch suspension, and you have to boost a lot, and the overall driving experience for me wasn't particularly that great, but it was average at best. The problem was I hate mining. The mining in this game is really tedious, it's really annoying. You have to basically go around in your rover and then scan for resources under the ground, and once those resources come up with a degree of, a decent return on your scanner, then you can drop a mining droid, basically. And the problem with that is the fact that, one, I'm not sure if they're randomly generated locations in terms of where you can find the resources, but often they are really awkward to get to in this giant flipping car. That's really annoying, especially if the highest resource point is on a really steep cliff and you have to kind of drive up and slightly askew to it. It's really irritating, quite fiddly, and I just did not enjoy that experience at all. It was very tedious, very busy work, and overall I felt that that could have certainly been something that they improved the execution of. Now let's talk about the big negatives here, because there are a couple of really big negatives to Mass Effect Andromeda, even in this very short slice into the game itself. The first is, going back to one of my old gameplay trailers discussions, was the fact that I complained at the time that the facial animations did not look great at all. Especially, there was one scene in one of the gameplay trailers where Ryder was pulling out a gun and she looked like she stubbed her toe rather than she was trying to be aggressive, and it looked ridiculous, and it really took the immersion out of that scene for me. And I complained about that at great length at the time, and a lot of people slated me for that. They said that I was completely wrong, I didn't know what I was talking about, it wasn't going to be like that in the final version, etc, etc, etc. And guess who was proven right? That's right, I was proven right, because the game is full of that. It is absolutely full of that. The facial animations aren't that great. There's a lot of cases where they are great, and a lot of characters that they have no problems with, but I think that there are clear, distinct moments in this game where the facial animation is just not up to scratch. The voice acting too, for the most part, really solid, enjoyable, but then you have these moments where it's just completely off. There is one instance very early on in the game where you are talking to a woman who has literally no animation on her face for the entirety of the conversation, and then on top of that she sounds like one of those automatic voice recordings when you go to play your credit card. She says things like, what happened to Pathfinder? And it's like, that is just, what are you, a robot? What, like, are you an android? You have no emotion within your voice nor within your face, and it really does it's really noticeable, to the point of that it pulls you out of the immersion, and it is very problematic, and it's not even subtle. It's not even like you can forgive it, like, it's just a one-off, and it's not, there's multiple points within the game even in the first couple of hours where that is a case, it is noticeable and it is frequent. It is also a case with the dialogue, like I've said, and it's also a case with the writing. The writing can go from really, really good in this game to really god-awful, and I don't know where the disconnect is there. Like, which team of writers did which parts, and then did they hire some freelancers or something to do certain parts? Because there's just really great conversations, and then there's just outright bad ones that I think, oh, like, God, what am I listening to right now? And that is just pretty much sums up the game in terms of its visuals, in terms of its dialogue, and in terms of its voice acting. It is just a mixed bag all around. There's really good parts, and then there's really god-awful parts. Visually, in terms of the graphical fidelity of the game, it looks fantastic. I have to say that it looks gorgeous. I loved everything about the way it looks and the way it sounds, apart from a few missing sound effects here and there. But I have to say that the game looks great. The problem I had was that the performance was a little bit of an issue from time to time. For the most part, it ran really smoothly, but then I would run into ridiculously bad FPS drops out of absolutely nowhere. And they didn't really seem to uniform or make any sense. Like, oh, there's a ton of characters on screen right now with loads of explosions, so the FPS is going to naturally tank. But that wasn't the case. I would literally be staring at a wall with nothing happening, and the FPS would just drop down to about 15 frames per second for no apparent reason. And it's not like I was playing this game on any kind of bad machine. Now, from what the vertical slice of the game was in terms of its early access build, I have to say that overall, I did enjoy my experience. Now, does that mean that it is going to be great overall in terms of this 60, 70-hour game? I'm not sure. And I'm not sure how long the main story is going to be. I'm not sure how much there's going to be in terms of side content, in terms of the characters' interactions, all the side quests that are involved with the characters themselves. How much content is there going to be? How much meaningful content is there going to be? Is it going to be a game where I'm running around just collecting resources so that I can build new equipment, rather than actually experiencing some meaningful side quests? For me, I have to say that I am slightly more optimistic about the main game than I was previous. However, there does remain a distinct number of issues within the game itself. And one of those big issues is the fact that it takes ages to actually travel anywhere on the space map, because you have to wait for this wormhole travel to go to each and every single planet instead of just going do. You have to wait for an extended period of time just to travel anywhere. And that does get a little bit grating. I am a fan of the story thus far. I can't comment on how it ends, and because we all know how important Mass Effect endings are. But for the most part, the premise of the story, the main characters that I've seen so far, they do look interesting. I think in terms of a narrative, it certainly has gripped me to want to see more. But it's one of those cases where, for me, if I'm taking myself out of it from my perspective and I'm looking at a perspective as a normal consumer, I would say this. At this stage, if you are a fan of the Mass Effect series and you really enjoyed games like Dragon Age Inquisition, if you're a big fan of Dragon Age Inquisition, you're going to absolutely love Andromeda. Absolutely, 100% love Andromeda. For me, Andromeda is Dragon Age Inquisition with a better combat system, like flat out. But there are distinct issues with Andromeda itself. I think if you're one of those die-hard fans of BioWare and BioWare games and Dragon Age series and Mass Effect series, then you're going to fall in love with Andromeda like you did with the rest of them. I think if you are just looking for an RPG to play, it certainly will fit that bill, no doubt about it. It's great quality, great execution thus far, but there are very distinct problems and noticeable problems, and you can't not notice them. It's not something that you can ignore throughout, especially if you enjoy a really good story-driven experience. You can't ignore bad voice acting. You can't ignore bad dialogue. You can't ignore multiple bugs, multiple performance issues. You can't ignore bad facial animation. It's just something that's there. And it's a case of the game at this point, because it's not really going to change in terms of the facial animation. It's not going to change the voice acting at this late stage. So it is a case of they need to make sure that the content and the storyline of the game is ultimately enough and charming enough and enticing enough to let players allow its issues to slide for the most part. It is a case of this is not going to be Game of the Year. I can tell you that right now, with the sheer amount of problems that I've experienced thus far and the amount of, issues within the core game design itself, it's not going to be a game of the year. However, it could shape up to be a really good, great even RPG, depending on what the rest of the game is like. And so I'm certainly cautiously optimistic at this point, but that is not to say that I approve or I'm letting go of the issues that are currently in the game. So that is my preview of Mass Effect Andromeda. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comment section below. Like, subscribe, share on social media, places like Facebook, Twitter and Reddit. And as always, I will see you next time.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything. And right now, I just want to know what happened with Alec. What happened with Pathfinder?